517. 517 says, one must know all the Buddha's viewpoints to be without contradiction. And so another translation of this is, one must never contradict any of the intentions of the Buddha's instructions. Yeah, so it can be translated in two ways. One, a more an advice in terms of what you should not do. That is, don't contradict any of the intentions of the Buddha's instructions. And so here, the second translation, don't contradict the intentions of the Buddha's instructions. There is, I think, a slight a differentiation between the instructions and the intentions. So there's a suggestion that, you should try to understand what is the intention behind any specific instructions. Rather than, of course, it's good. It's important that we observe the instructions, follow the instructions. And so on that level, I think if we can more carefully, more accurately, more diligently pay attention to the instructions and apply the instructions, then it's good. Then on that basis, on the basis of actually doing it, and not just philosophizing up in the head, but actually following those instructions, following the prescriptions, following the proscriptions, then as we do that, we want to allow room for what? For understanding, for developing the understanding, for cultivating the understanding of what is the intention behind those instructions. And then slowly, our observing of those instructions, application of those instructions become more and more effective, more and more profound. And so this is, I think, really important, to have the right balance between these two. And sometimes we especially, our overeducated types, we get so satisfied and proud as I understand the intention. And without really putting those instructions into practice, we intellectually think, intellectually we feel, we have so much trust in our intellect, in how smart we are. We may not walk around thinking we are smart, but in many ways, we believe that, and arrogantly believe that, I'm so smart. I understand the intention, so I don't need to follow those instructions. That would be a great error. Then the error that comes from following instructions without leaving room to cultivate an understanding of the intention behind the instructions can, of course, lead to a very rigid way, a very tight way of observing rules for fear of being punished, for fear of being criticized, for fear of being judged, for fear of losing face. That will be also a wrong way to apply the instructions. Instead, with proper understanding and appreciation for the actual instructions, knowing that the Buddha gave the instructions because the instructions, when applied, when taken to heart, when diligently observed, When skillfully, especially this word, you hear me use this a lot, it's skill. When skillfully practiced, will then give you deeper understanding and appreciation. Oh, wow. That rule, that do or that don't, initially I thought it was just for this reason. But as it turns out, it has the power to also work on such a subtle level of things. Then you begin to understand the Buddha's intention that lies behind these instructions. Then we can come to the advice, then we can actualize the advice in Vajra Statement 17, where you know that all the Buddha's instructions are without contradiction, insofar as when you understand the Buddha's intention behind these instructions. So this translation says, one must never contradict any of the intentions of the Buddha's instructions. And so in the larger commentary, it gives the context. It says, people claim that since one realizes the meaning that requires further interpretation and the definitive meaning differently, so this is referring to that division into the interpretable teachings and the definitive teachings. So some people say, since these two types of teachings are realized differently, it is sufficient for the practice to accord with one of these aspects. Meaning, as long as it accords with either the interpretable teachings or it accords with the ultimate teachings, you are fine. This is what I'm talking about. You lean in the direction of those of us who are overeducated. Oh, I understand the intention. So then you say, then as for the details of the instructions, I don't need it. Then you are creating a contradiction. By the way you relate to them, you are already asserting, making a contradiction. Or you say, oh, the instructions, the do's and the don'ts, just follow that. Don't ask any questions. Don't think about it. That's falling to the other side. Whereas we need to have that understanding, we need to have that view, we need to have that experience, the understanding that arises from experience, the experience that comes from applying these instructions, these practices, to then fully see how both the instructions and the intentions go hand in hand. Go hand in hand. These days, I think, sometimes we are too willing, too willing, too ready, too enthusiastic even to change the instructions and say, oh, that's relative to culture, relative to time period, relative to context. We're in the modern world. Don't need. We want to have, in English we say, we want to have your cake and eat it too. The origins of this expression, this is a little strange, have your cake and eat it too. What does that mean, I don't know the exact origins of this expression, but it reminds me of at least one way in which It actually explains what this expression means, have your cake and eat it too. Which is, there were people, who got a piece of the wedding cake of Prince Charles and Diana. And that, when you get that piece of cake, right? The cake was baked to be eaten, so you want to eat it, but you also don't want to eat it because you want to have it and keep it, So meaning is that that expression doesn't come from that, but that's a very good, I think. You got the cake, and you're going to preserve it at all costs, but you also want to eat it. So these days, like we want to have the cake and eat it too. Meaning, we want to be rid of the afflictive emotions, the mental defilements, and we also still want to keep them. So then we change the instructions. We change Buddha's instructions. We say, oh, that's 2,500 years ago. That is back when people were doing things this way or that way. And so that instruction we can change. We're too enthusiastic, to change like that. In other religions, maybe they kind of fall in the other direction, which is follow the rules, 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 Don't ask why. They kind of fall in that direction. Then for those of us who come from those traditions and turn to Buddhism, then we particularly have to be careful about seemingly Buddhism allows me to just do what I want. Sometimes the fault comes from people like me. In order to make the Buddha's teachings more attractive to those of you whom I know is suffering from the trauma of being told, practice this, practice this, practice this, practice this, do this, do this, do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, Then in order for me to sell my goods, to have more customers, I say, oh, you just practice whatever that is good for you. Oh, no need to practice things that you don't make any sense. And then when you don't practice those things, then I say, wow, how come they're not practicing? So I want to have my cake and eat it too. So that's the problem of, samsara. This particular appearance of samsara at this point, in our lives, in our world history. So be aware of, these challenges. I don't pretend to have the answers, but at least, try to develop some ability to see the ironies, the contradictions, without being judgmental, without being harsh about other people, about ourselves. It's possible to maintain what my friend, this morning I was communicating with my friend about some matters, Buddhist friend, very educated. He says, it's good to have non-nihilistic skepticism. Non-nihilistic. Skepticism can go quickly in the direction of nihilism, that nothing has any meaning, nothing matters, everything is just made up. That's very dangerous. But non-nihilistic skepticism, is the ability, I feel, to kind of see all the contradictions that we are, the absurdities we get ourselves into, the way we assert our positions, I'm right, you are wrong. Even among Buddhists, this view is right, this view is wrong, this view is, even as we study this, where we do talk about what view is right and what view is wrong, don't fall into this rigidity. Be able to kind of have a light shining back on yourself and say, hey, the certainty that you think you have now, is still based on, confusion, or tainted at least, maybe not based on completely, but still tainted by confusion. Don't be so sure. But this, don't be so sure, should not lead to nihilism. Meaning, oh, I'm not sure, so I cannot do anything. I'm paralyzed. Because I like everything to be sure. Then, we don't understand the Buddha's most basic, most fundamental. Basic doesn't mean not important. Basic means fundamental. The Buddha's most fundamental teachings about uncertainty. Yesterday, everything could look just perfect. Yesterday, everything could just feel completely fine. Overnight, everything changed. Everything that you hold to be, valuable, you hold to be precious, you hold to be, you cannot imagine that anything would change, can change, overnight. Can change within the day. Doesn't even need to be overnight, Between this hour and next hour, something could change, then everything thrown upside down. And when everything gets thrown upside down, these days, it's all magnified. Lots of exclamation points. Because it's so hard to get people's attention these days, Simply because, why? Because our attention is so short now. So unless you make it really loud, unless you make it really colorful, unless you make it for and against, I'm not just talking about one side. See the interdependence, for and against, all becoming very loud. This is the nature. We talk about the 8 worldly concerns, It affects us, all of us, With fame, what's the other side? Defame. With gain, what is the other side? Loss. With pleasure, what is the other side? Pain. With praise, what is the other side? Blame. They are shadows of each other. So how do we skillfully relate to the 8 concerns? When you are being blamed, when you are you're suffering loss of good name, when you're suffering loss, when you're suffering pain, know that, what's also stalking like a shadow, waiting for the opportunity to come, is the other side. Gain, pleasure, praise, fame. When you get those things, also know its twin is hiding. They say that a bird can fly very high, but its shadow is never gone. So a bird, an object, can go higher. The higher the object goes, the more you think, oh, its shadow has disappeared. But no, it's just a matter of one of these days. It has to come back down. Then once it comes closer and closer, oh, the shadow becomes clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer. So this is the nature of the 8 worldly concerns. Especially the early Kyobpa masters, the Kadampa masters, emphasize so much, Be determined that you are not going to be dragged around by the 8 worldly concerns. If we don't remember that, it will get very shaken. So, 517. Coming back to the words of 517, you must know that all the Buddhas, whether instructions or intentions, they don't contradict. Can you see they don't contradict? Here is not saying that you force yourself to believe that they don't contradict. That's not the point. Again, if you force yourself to believe, I have to believe they don't contradict, I have to believe they don't contradict, doesn't work. In fact, all these statements here Of course, when we're learning the statements, it's just intellectual. But as I said about the Four Noble Truths, also see how, for now, they are noble rumors. So these are called Vajra statements, But for now, maybe just, Vajra-like statements. We ourselves have to verify that they are indeed Vajra, meaning indestructible, meaning they clearly show the way things are. But not enough to just believe. Not enough to just believe. Now we're at the learning stage. So at the learning stage, some degree of belief, some degree of at least suspending disbelief, we say. Some degree of withholding immediate disbelief is necessary because we're learning. Otherwise, we won't be able to learn, we won't be able to absorb. So we learn, we absorb. Right? So when we learn and we absorb, then the necessity of belief, the necessity of even suspending disbelief becomes lesser and lesser over time. Because what is more helpful and what is more reliable will begin to form, which is clarity. Ability to see clearly. Not just on the superficial level, but deeply we begin to trust our ability to see more and more clearly. And then this is when these statements become Vajra. To call them Vajra statements, on the superficial level, it's flattering, Jigten Sumgon. But he doesn't need to be flattered, But often, religious things turns like into that, Like we're flattering Jigten Sumgon. Oh, your statements are Vajra statements. The great master's statements, they're just statements, not Vajra. Yours, they are Vajra. Then when people get into sectarianism, my lineage, our statements are Vajra. Your statements are not Vajra. That's the completely wrong way to relate to these Vajra statements. So we have to verify their Vajra status. We have to actualize their Vajra status. Just like the noble truths. Those truths have to be ennobled, made noble by our realization. Then they become noble truths for us. They are truths that will make us the Aryas, which is the translation for noble. We're not talking about nobility, like the House of Windsor. The current occupants of the throne of Great Britain. We're not talking about that kind of nobility. We're talking about Aryas, meaning like in the Bodhisattva context, those who have achieved the first bhumi, the path of seeing, at least they are noble ones. In the Shravakayana context, at least stream enterant, they have become noble ones. They have become Aryas. They are Aryas. The least qualification of Aryas are those who have no longer fall back into confusion. They're not yet, not necessarily, although Buddhas are Aryas. In the Buddha's case, completely realized. But at the first level of Bodhisattva bhumis, achieving the path of seeing, or in the Shravaka system, stream enterant, then they no longer because they have removed, right, the causes that will cause them to again be confused. No more. But still, things to purify. So statement 17, let's look at Khenpo Kunpal's commentary. One should not become a pretentious teacher or meditator who is biased in terms of the three collections of the scriptures, the three trainings of the path, and the three vows of the path, and so forth. Like a yak who is blind in one eye and therefore eats the grass in one direction. I like this. A yak who is blind in one eye and therefore eats the grass in only one direction. So it says, don't be limited, don't be biased in that way. You have mastered something, you become a pretentious teacher, or you have a meditator and you think, I'm doing so well. But you only have picked up one aspect of the three collections of scriptures, the Tripitaka, right? You have only one training among the three trainings of the path, or kind of like see one level of vows as most important or more important than the other levels, and not seeing that they are all basically the same thing. Don't do that, it says. Instead, one must know all the Buddha's viewpoints to be without contradiction, and practice all the scriptural traditions as elucidating pith instructions. See all the teachings, right, as clarifying the fundamental point. And so in the bigger commentary, it says, what is this fundamental point? This fundamental point is Mahamudra. So quoting one sutra, it says, the sutras I have taught in 1,000 world realms have a different wordings, but they all have the same meaning. By practicing a single word, they are all practice. That we need to develop that kind of understanding. Then Atisha says, whichever of the 84,000 collections of the Dharma have been taught, that you have learned, they all engage in and boil down to true reality, to realizing true reality, through realizing Mahamudra. So here, the commentary, it is like the Lord and Protector of beings, Vajra Rinpoche, said. Vajra Rinpoche was Khenpo Kunpal's main teacher. So he's quoting his main teacher. Vajra Rinpoche said, one must practice all the scriptural traditions as elucidating pith instructions. So this is using vocabulary, as technical vocabulary. So there is scriptural traditions, which is like the main sutras and the tantras that the Buddha taught. Pith instructions is like special to like oral transmission, like special points. Now here what is being emphasized, so these special points, especially these pith instructions, especially like in Tibet, sometimes it's valued more than the scriptural tradition. Because they say, oh, the scriptural tradition, oh yes, that's the common, but pith instructions are the uncommon. Oh, very special. Only our lineage has it. Then even within the lineage, they'll say, within our lineage, only certain people have the really, really special pith instructions. Secret, cannot tell the rest of you. So there's this tendency of like, pith instructions, more amazing. But here, all these scriptural traditions are truly the pith instructions. It's a matter of, can you see how they are pith instructions? Do you have the ability to understand them in such a profound way? If you don't have right now, if you feel you don't have right now, know that it can be developed, it can be cultivated. That, after all, is the whole point. Also, sometimes we think, oh, I'm now Buddhist. Then again, even though I've repeated many times, even though you know it intellectually, you think being Buddhist means being Buddha now. I'm Buddha now. Then, of course, when reality hits, you're like, wait, I'm not Buddha. Then you get disappointed, and you become, again, so harsh, to yourself. And then when you're harsh to yourself, then of course you're harsh to other people. It's like that, no contradiction there, that's how it happens, Don't do that, Understand that being Buddhist means one of the implications of being Buddhist, being Dharma practitioners, is knowing that we can develop the qualities that we want, that we admire, and we can be free from the mental defilements that we recognize to be so harmful. That right now, even though we can't do that, we have not actualized that, know that we can actualize that. So like that sign, I saw in Bhutan by the roadside, somebody wrote this. It says, every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. We are not stuck, Every saint has a complicated past. Every sinner can have a promising future. Therefore, to abandon discipline due to perceiving it as contradictory to the secret mantra is a distorted discipline. Meaning to abandon the pratimoksha, the individual liberation discipline, due to thinking that it contradicts what secret mantra is teaching, that is a perversion. Whether for higher or lower persons. No matter, you should not think, oh, I am so advanced now. The rules in the individual liberation vows no longer apply to me. If there is anyone who can say that, it was Buddha Shakyamuni. Say that or do that. Did he say that, do that? No. The Buddha Shakyamuni said, I am no longer affected by alcohol. Okay, party on. Of course, he was no longer affected by alcohol, but he did not say, therefore, I invite all of you to come watch me indulge in alcohol and not get wasted. He did not do that. I'm no longer touched by anger, so I'm going to throw my temper around for your benefit. He did not do that. My mind is now so beyond any, possibility of straying, of being confused, of creating suffering. Okay, I don't meditate anymore. He did not do that. Therefore, here in our tradition, Jigten Sumgon never considers them to be contradictory. As in, he doesn't see a contradiction. And can we, through our actions, not just through other words, words cheap, through our actions, not see, not assert contradictions, not create contradictions. In the larger commentary, I want to read you Professor Zobich summarizing the different commentaries from the early period for this statement. There's some important, I feel, so here, quoting an instruction that Pamodrupa gave to Jigten Sumgon, Pamodrupa says to Kyobpa Rinpoche, to Jigten Sumgon, there are two ways, in which people, in which we can relate. There are two ways that two directions that can happen in terms of how we relate to Dharma. Turning the Dharma into activity and turning activities into Dharma. A person who does not practice with joyful enthusiasm and avoids even minor hardships will not accomplish even mundane virtue, since the root, namely the mind, does not turn into Dharma. In other words, such a person turns Dharma into mere activity. That's the first. Turning Dharma into activities. In other words, simply going through the motions and parroting the Dharma. On the other hand, a person whose activity turns into Dharma does that through first understanding how extremely rare it is to obtain this life complete with the endowments and leisures, then to meet the Dharma, and then to obtain the vital instructions of a reliable guru. This person understands that everything produced, whatever is produced, whatever is compounded, is impermanent, that those pleasures of this life are deceptive, unreliable, and therefore and thereby their mind gains more and more certainty of the Dharma, and they don the great armor of effort so that problems and suffering can never wear them down. Right now, we all get worn down by problems and suffering, really. I do. But the point is not to remain like this. The point is to develop, to wear this great armor of effort so that problems and suffering don't wear us down. In Bodhicaya Vatara Shantideva says, there are those who upon seeing their own blood flowing become more courageous. It says these are real bodhisattvas. Like real bodhisattvas have to be like that. Like when they see themselves bleeding, they become even more brave, more determined, more courageous. He says, and then, Shantideva says, and then there are those, who seeing the blood of others, panics. That would be me in real life. Forget about seeing my blood and becoming brave, Seeing other people's blood, I would faint. Shantideva says, don't be like that. When you are wanting to battle the mental defilements. Now, of course, he's using the imagery of a warrior. It says you want to battle the afflictive emotions, you want to battle the mental defilements. When you want to overcome them, you have to be like this great warrior. So upon seeing their own blood flowing, become even more courageous. Knowing that to accomplish Buddhahood in this life, you must disregard body and life, and become like Milarepa, who could crush his body and life into dust to serve Marpa. Unquote. It is of great importance that the mind of the yogi is thoroughly purified by such difficulties, by such service. So this is an interesting point. Pamadrupa actually says, if you don't develop the willingness to bear difficulties in your Dharma practice, we as in me, for sure, probably you too, we come to Dharma practice hoping that Dharma practice will remove difficulties. Really. That's why I practice Dharma, you know. But actually, Pamundrupa here reminds Jigten Sumgon, it's not going to work. Because we need to develop the capacity and the willingness to endure these difficulties. Because through such service, so I talked about this at the center, you know. If you come to the center thinking, you know, oh, I don't want to be stressed. Yes, initially, that's what brought us there. But then if you don't understand, you don't know, you think, oh, the way to really be doing well in the center is you, quote unquote, you know, get to hang out with the Lama, you know, get to take pictures with the visiting Rinpoche and think, oh, I've made it. Then you have wasted your time. Because the Dharma context is such a small context. You want that kind of acknowledgement, you want that kind of privilege, go do other things. It will be quicker, it will be easier. It will be fancier. Don't waste your time at the Dharma center like this. It says, such service, such difficulties, if it is not purified, if you don't make use of these difficulties to purify your mental defilements, then even if qualities arise, seemingly without going through this purification, these qualities can become tarnished. This is a really interesting point, you know. If without having gone through difficulties in your Dharma practice, and sometimes difficulties that you knowingly pick up, so what are these difficulties? These difficulties is sandpaper. If you don't use the sandpaper to smooth it out, if you don't use the cleaning products to clean the vessel, even if some good food, some good substance you manage to put into this vessel, and superficially, you know, you're like, yay, I got a quality, right? Something good here. It will become contaminated very quickly. Like a vessel, you know, like a plate, like a container. If you don't disinfect, right? And some of you know this, right? If you don't disinfect like your mason jar and you're going to make some pickles, some pickled vegetables, it will turn poisonous. Even if you put the best vinegar, the best vegetables, organic, macrobiotic, la. If your mason jar is not cleaned properly, whatever good things you put inside, superficially, in the short term, it looks like, oh, I have this. But it will turn poisonous. What is the reason for this? The propensities arising from beginningless mental defilements block one's mental continuum. And if realization arises before one has completely purified those, propensities, then the latent impediments will be aroused by the realization. And then putting all this good stuff into your mason jar that is not sterilized will become food for the contaminants, the latent propensities, negative propensities to turn up big. To purify those defects, however, some, quote, comfortable Dharma and mishmash practice will not do. Pamadrupa says to Jigten Sumgon. To try to purify those defects with some comfortable Dharma, quote, comfortable Dharma and mishmash practice will not do. In short, quote, without accomplishing suffering and hardship for the Dharma, qualities will not arise. This is the transmitted teaching of this precious lineage. Pamadrupa says to Jigten Sumgon. This is what's so special about the lineage that I have. So Rinchen Changchup sums up all these points by stating, if certain knowledge of the Dharma, certainty about the Dharma is not arising at the beginning, if you don't put effort into letting it arise, then your Dharma turns into mere action. And since those who make no real efforts for the sake of the Dharma are kind of hopeless, do not let this happen. Those in whom certain knowledge of the Dharma has arisen heap up any actions that they have accomplished in their mental continuum as a virtuous Dharma. So once you have make efforts to gain this clarity about the Dharma at the beginning, then all your actions turn into Dharma. If you don't have that, then all the so-called Dharma you acquire turns into mere actions, mere show, big show, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, all just useless show. Good. Ready for difficulties? You don't have to, start, like whipping yourself. Yeah. And this is no excuse, for the footnote. No excuse, Dharma center or not, for anyone to take advantage of you, to manipulate you, to guilt trip you. Also, don't allow that to happen, So a lot of Dharma centers, intentionally or unintentionally, can also become very dysfunctional that way. But on the other hand, if we really want to progress, we cannot fear hardships, especially in the Dharma context. So that whatever hardships that turn up in the Dharma context, you have a great opportunity to use that as the great purifier, as the great sandpaper, as the great cleaning product to clean out the vessel. Suffering in and of itself, difficulties in and of itself, has no qualities. So elsewhere, Jigten Sumgon has one teaching that says, don't make the mistake of thinking merely going through suffering is going to lead you to a higher place. He says, if that's the case, all these wild animals leading such difficult lives, not knowing what their next meal is going to be, not knowing if someone's going to eat them in the next moment, suffering constant fear and uncertainty. Oh, they would all be Buddhas already. In fact, in that teaching, Jigten Sumgon, we translated that. Jigten Sumgon even says, he says, you might think that Milarepa became so great because of his suffering. He said, no, not because of his suffering, but because of him knowing what to do with his suffering. Knowing how to frame, how to contextualize his suffering. Then, he says, then that becomes the great purifier. So if you got food poisoning, from the fast food place, that you bought from, or for that matter, from the fancy restaurant that you paid $200 for your chef's, design set meal, right? Now suffering comes, right? Itself doesn't make you better, that suffering. But if you know how to experience that suffering, it becomes a great purifier. Doesn't mean you don't go sue the place, Maybe you have to sue the place. That's what I mean by the footnote, Don't get taken advantage of. Don't just because you say, oh, people know, oh, he's Buddhist, we can just push him around. Best not to tell people you're Buddhist, actually, because people have all kinds of ideas about what a Buddhist is. I mean, don't have to be paranoid of people knowing you're Buddhist, but for the most part, it's no one's business. Once you say you're Buddhist, and anything that happens to any Buddhist anywhere, suddenly everyone wants you to explain what is going on. What do I know? What do I know? Then worse you get into, I need to defend my people. Shantideva again, he says, if you get angry at anyone because you see them harming your religion, harming your precious Buddha, Shantideva says, the Buddha himself said this. If you find yourself getting angry that someone's harming your Dharma, your teacher, your whatever, then you are not yet my disciple. Not that Buddha is being harsh, Buddha is simply saying, actually, you don't get what I'm teaching. You don't understand what I'm trying to teach you. Yeah. If the water that I'm giving you to put out the fire, now you have made it into gasoline, finish. The way of the world is to tell you, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do that, We get carried away. When you have the Dharma in your heart, not so easy for the world to carry you all over the place. You remain unmoving. So please, we all try to do our best. I will try to do my best. All of this, cheap to say. I have a gift of saying things, Now I have to practice. Now you have to practice. Otherwise, yep. entertaining for the hour that I'm yapping and you're listening. And then after that, what? Right? I have to put into practice. Nobody can pull us out of suffering if we insist on suffering. Even all the Buddhas of the 10 directions, gang up to try to pull you out of suffering. If you insist on suffering, there's nothing more powerful to subvert all the compassion of the Buddhas. Your insistence to suffer. Now he's blaming the victim. This is the world. Page 10 of dedication. Yeah, so if you didn't hear most of today's teachings, I think it's worth re-listening because we need to remind ourselves, once, twice, 3 times. Yeah, I think. So let's now do our dedication. Sublime, precious, venerable, and glorious root and lineage gurus, assembly of Idam deities, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas dwelling in the 10 directions, and all assemblies of Viras, Viranis, Yoginis, and Dakinis, please heed me. May the virtues collected in the 3 times by me and the entirety of samsara and nirvana and the inherent root of virtue not result in the 8 worldly dharmas, the 4 causes of samsara and the resultant states of hearers and solitary realizers, and may all mother sentient beings limitless as the sky, particularly those enemies who hate us, obstructors who harm those who create obstacles, maras who mislead, and their mara retinues have happiness, be separated from suffering, and quickly attain the unsurpassed, perfect, and precious Bodhi. By the power of this vast root of virtue, may we benefit sentient beings with body, speech, and mind. May the afflictive thoughts of attachment, aversion, ignorance, pride, and jealousy not arise in my mind stream. May thoughts of name, fame, gain, respect, and so forth in this life not arise for even a moment. With my mind stream moistened by love, compassion, and bodhicitta, may I come under the care of virtuous spiritual friends, and having become as limitless as space, may I achieve the supreme attainment of Mahamudra in this very life. By the virtues collected in the 3 times by me and the entirety of samsara and nirvana, and by the innate root of virtue, may I and all sentient beings quickly attain the unsurpassed, perfect, complete, precious Bodhi. Okay. See you tomorrow.